Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston.
Back from a lovely holiday, aren't you?
Oh, so good. So good.
So this week's guest is Gemma Ware, Head of Audio at The Conversation. So I've been keen to have Gemma on for a while because The Conversation, they've been entering the Publisher Podcast Awards, I think pretty much since they started 7 years ago. And every year we've watched them, well, we've listened to them get better and better. And last year they took home a couple of trophies, including Podcast Publisher of the Year, which we awarded them because all of the shows they entered were consistently among the top one or two in each category they entered. So it's very, very well deserved, and it's been brilliant to watch them grow, basically.
I mean, if we think back to when we started this many, many moons ago, that was exactly the point, right? You know, it was to help people get better at making podcasts. And I love this kind of story because when you've got that small team doing amazing things, and we've had some amazing winners that were just, you know, do you remember Simon Brew won with film stories?
I think he's won twice.
Yeah, and he's just him, basically. And I love those stories, I really do. And, you know, I'm not against big guys and corporates and whatever, but they're working with significant resources most of the time. So people like The Conversation doing what they do and learning as they go is just amazing. I love those stories.
Yeah. And actually, Gemma initially, she didn't even join as an audio producer. It was an opportunity she saw come up as part of her editorial role. And this is something we see quite a lot, especially among smaller publications that have tried podcasting or exploring it. It rarely starts with like this dedicated audio lead. It's somebody in the editorial team who's got another role who sort of spots an opportunity or maybe tries something out and ends up sort of developing off what could be quite a decent business. Basically just seeing what happens.
Do you remember Dave Musgrove at Immediate?
Yes.
His origin story is nuts. It was just basically recording an interview and thinking, I could do something with this. And look at what they're doing now.
No, History X has got to be like one of the biggest history podcasts in the UK.
Yeah.
It's insane.
No, they're amazing.
So Gemma takes us through how The Conversation's podcasting strategy has evolved. That's everything from the types of episode they produce to how they pull them together and what topics they choose. I mean, The Conversation's podcasts have literally covered everything from like, there was a brilliant series I listened to last year about class structure in Britain to scam factories in Southeast Asia. And they've just done one this year, a special series on Jane Austen. So like the breadth is wild.
Yeah. Well, The Conversation, the breadth of the stuff on there is pretty well done anyway. I love The Conversation. Such smart people writing such smart stuff. So for them to carry that across into the podcast, I mean, that's one of the questions we ask, right? How does your podcast strategy support your editorial strategy and vice versa? And they're the perfect use case for that. But, I hate to be crass, but what's the business case? They're a non-profit. So where does audio come in the filthy lucre sector?
Peter the Bean Counter.
Yeah.
Gemma does explain this towards the end. So like podcast measurement is pretty primitive still.
Crap.
So they're quite reliant on downloads and like the brand mentions they get as part of the related coverage to prove their value to their university members. But what's quite important to her is that the podcast content doesn't stand alone. They always look to create like a lot of written content off the back of it. And they've got much, much better metrics on that written content. And in a way, this means they can be a lot more experimental with subject matter because there aren't the same commercial pressures, but like obviously they aren't entirely free of pressure to show success in some way.
Well, since I've been lying beside a pool for a week, I'm excited to hear this one. I definitely am.
There were a couple of stories I could have chosen this week, some magazine ones that would have got you talking nonstop. But I did try and get a related one this week. So there's a really good piece I stumbled across on LinkedIn from Elsie Escobar about the video hype cycle, which is one of my favourite topics at the moment. And I wanted to bring it in this week because Gemma and I do sort of touch on this towards the end of the episode. Elsie sets out the case that the video podcast gold rush will end, which is probably shocking to nobody. But she describes this intimate, earthy core, which is built to survive. She does this brilliant sort of brief history from like the COVID boom to the deconstruction in 2024-25, where a lot of the money kind of pouring into podcasting stopped and basically only the big shows and players now benefit.
I mean, talk about Immediate again, that faces and voices, right? It's the same thing. It's the same idea that personalities.
she describes video as like this white knight riding in to save the podcast industry. And one of the quotes that she comes up with, I could quote this entire piece, but she says, "I'm not saying podcasting is failing, far from it. I'm saying the industry is misinterpreting what podcasting actually is," which I think anybody who's tried to define like what this blurry mess is at the moment would agree with. And so she says the heart of podcasting has always been built on the human voice, intimate connection, and our capacity to speak directly to our people. This is where the earthy thing comes in. It is a slow, steady, earthy medium. And that reality, you'll like this bit, that reality goes directly against the capitalistic, year-over-year, exponential growth mindset of modern business.
Yes, Elsie. Stick it to the capitalists. Rapacious bean-counting fools. And she's right, though. When all you're looking at is growth, and getting growth however you get there, you're just missing the point, right?
The other argument I actually quite liked from her is, and again, it sort of goes against the growth. And I think this is something we've struggled with a little bit, is that she says most podcasts will build an audience and then reach this plateau and basically like stay at that level through the show's lifetime. And like that could be quite a difficult mindset to get into when it feels like everybody else and everything else is growing, but that's just not the way podcasting works. So she says like people should be asking themselves, what can I build with these 100 intimate, dedicated listeners? And kind of build a business around the small and sustainable rather than constantly chasing that growth. And I feel like that kind of reflects our journey. Like, you know, we've got a very steady, very core listenership, but no matter how much we like try and drive it, we never get that hockey stick growth.
Again, without being crass and commercial about it, that's what we sell on. We sell on that idea if we got 200, 300, 400, 500 people in a room, then those are the right people to be in the room, and you'll do well reaching those people. Some of the quotes in this are brilliant. This idea that the rush of capital into video podcasting is not sustainable. It's the peak of the hype. The parallels with AI in this are just nuts, right? It's the same. I saw a piece from Adam Tinworth the other day saying the same thing about AI. We're at that peak of the hype cycle and just about to drop into the trough of despair or whatever it's called. But that idea that what she's saying in this quote is that the industry with a capital I isn't chasing video because it deepens the connection with listeners. They're chasing it because they're banking on massive corporate advertising dollars. Boo!
Yes. Preach.
Well, it's the same thing that happened with Vice and BuzzFeed and whoever else, Mashable. It's the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, the other point she made is that like everybody else is then chasing that hype without looking at the long-term reality of sustaining it. And that, I think, is absolutely crucial. And that's why the last pivot to video completely fell over, is because it wasn't sustainable. So her big prediction is that basically within 5 years, the video pipeline and all that hype and everything else will be gone. The gold rush growth will have vanished. It's good news, though, and I'm not going to ruin the ending. We'll pop a link to this in our news at the top of our newsletter, voices.media. Sign up for it. She's also got some brilliant advice about focusing on podcasts and how to do that sustainably. So that's definitely an absolute must-read from us this week.
She also has one of the best names ever, Elsie Escobar. That's a great name.
So as I mentioned at the start, Gemma didn't come into the conversation as a podcast editor. So I started by asking her what got her interested in audio and what opportunities she spotted for the format in her role.
I joined as education editor in the first 6 months of the Conversation's kind of beta project launching in the UK. So it already launched in Australia a couple of years before that, and then it launched in the UK in 2013. So I joined 2014, and we were really just trying to establish our feet, get a foothold in the UK. People didn't know who we were, or how we worked. And then a couple of years into that, myself and a colleague called Annabelle Bly, who I always have to credit because the two of us kind of were big podcast fans. We were listening to kind of that serial moment. We were all listening to This American Life. We were listening mainly to American shows at that time.
That was the start of that wave, right? In the UK, podcasting didn't really take off until like 2017, 2018.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were just listening to a lot. And, you know, I've always listened to radio. I've never worked in radio, but I love it. I ingest things that I listen to way better than things that I watch or read. So we thought these ideas that we're dealing with every day in the written word that we're editing, we think that they can be explored even further in audio. And you can make kind of links with different academics in a way that you can't do in the written word, because the way the conversation works is it's usually 1, 2 or 3 academics writing an 800-word article about something in the news or about their research or a topic they know well. And we thought, well, why don't we just see what a conversation-based conversation podcast could do? And yeah, so that's how we started doing it. In 2016, we started our first podcast in the UK.
And were academics okay with that? Because presumably they're very, very good at writing. They're very used to writing, a bit like journalists in that sense. They're very au fait with the written word. Did they adapt okay to kind of being on mic?
Yeah, obviously there are some, and I think this has changed in the decade that we've done it, but there are some who have had media training and they've been on radio a lot and they're just, very seasoned public speakers. But there are some, and we really like talking to younger academics. We really want, because a lot of the time they're doing really interesting field work, or they're doing their research right now. They're very on the ground, and they can be quite nervous. But I think we've always said, we're not really trying to catch them out. We really actually want to get the story of their research across. We want to make them feel as good as they can about talking about their work. So yeah, it's been, and there's been technical issues along the way. When we first started, we were based as an organisation at City University in London, and we used their journalism studios there, which was great. But it meant that we had to kind of come in and out of when the students were using the studios, obviously. So we had to do our interviews really early in the morning. We often did them at 8 in the morning. So the academics, bless them, were really game for that. And we're like, thank you to anyone who spoke to us back then. We were trying it out. We were learning. We did a lot of the interviews on Skype back then.
Oh, I remember the Skype interviews. The audio quality was awful. Yeah,
and then sometimes academics had access to ISDN lines in their, which seems such an anachronistic way of doing it now. I don't know. Yeah, but we did a lot of interviews on ISDN lines when we could, because the quality was just better. But it was fun. It felt really exciting, and we were doing it in and around our other work. It was a side project basically that Annabelle and I did.
Yeah. And at what point did it start to become more than just a side project? At what point did the business sort of see that, there's actually something here that's worth sort of investing in?
So at the beginning, the show that we launched back then was called The Anthill, and it was a monthly show. And it was because we loved This American Life. We took a theme and we did 3 stories on that theme. We talked to 3 academics. Sometimes we talked to more than 3 academics in each episode. But we did episodes on kind of memory, on pain, on humour. And we were just knitting together completely linked but unrelated research. And actually, monthly is quite a difficult periodicity for podcasts. It's a lot of work. And you feel like you have a lot of time, but if it's not your full-time job, or you haven't really got a dedicated person doing it, it's actually really hard. So we sat back, and around 2019, we decided to focus on series. So we shifted to doing a series-based approach. And the reason we did that is you can obviously just get a lot more traction for series. You can do more in-depth work leading up to it. You can build a series of content in the written form around them, and you can really push it out across a series of weeks. And so we decided to shift to that. We also, we're a charity. We get our money from universities and from grant-giving foundations. So we thought that there would be more opportunity to get funding related to specific topics around series. So that's essentially why we did that shift to series back then in 2019.
And I mean, they've got a longer shelf life as well. I guess people are more inclined to go back and listen to maybe like a 6-parter rather than scroll back through archives for a monthly podcast.
Absolutely. They really do. There's just evergreenness to them. We did 2 right at the beginning. One was it was called To the Moon and Beyond, which was a global collaboration where it was essentially looking 50 years from the moon landings, and then 50 years. It was the 50th anniversary of the moon landings. So it's 2019. And then we looked to 50 years into the future, what it might look like 100 years from the moon landings. And that had academics from all over the world. And we used that as a kind of learning experience to then go and do other series. And I think, when we really got the model working was when we did the series called The Expert Guide to Conspiracy Theories. And that actually launched in around, I think it launched in February 2020. Just
Very good timing.
Yeah, we'd been working on it kind of in a few months before that. And it was supported by a grant from a European Union funded network of academics who had been doing kind of 5 years work of research on conspiracy theories across Europe. And we had this wonderful access to all these academics. And My colleague Annabelle talked to loads of them, very kind of the history of conspiracy theories, how, they're not a new thing. And the internet's just exploded them, but they've been around in society for centuries. And that just the timing of that worked really well. And that series is, it still stands up. It's 6 years old, but it's still fascinating to go back and listen to.
God, that was all 6 years ago. So what are some of those early learnings that you found from series that has maybe shaped the way that you approach series now?
I think back then we didn't really think about how we would talk about the series very much, like the marketing element of it. We just kind of thought they would go out into the world on their own. And we've learned a lot about, the different ways you can do that. And, it's not an exact science, is it, podcast marketing, but, we try and do a bit more of it nowadays. Yeah. And I think it's developing, there are definitely, ways to do it better now. We don't have any money for advertising, so we can't advertise our series. Yeah, we don't spend money on paid for advertising. So yeah, that's part of it. In terms of format, I think this idea of kind of evergreenness is something that we've learnt from back then. And just this idea that if you're going to get someone to come with you across 5, 6, 7 episodes, there needs to be a thread through it. They need to kind of build on episode 1 to 2 to 3. We did a series during the pandemic, which I'd love to do more of those episodes. I found them fascinating. It was called Recovery. It's a little bit like a kind of In Your Time-esque series where we got 3 academics to talk about moments in history when the world had recovered. This was in the depths of COVID, when nobody thought we would ever get out of it. And we're like, yeah, the world's gone through horrible things before. So the plague, the Spanish flu, even the fall of the Soviet Union. And for me, I found that even though each episode was completely different, you were building on the knowledge that you'd learned on the previous one, the different series, the crises that had happened before. So yeah, I think that narrative thread, or that need to get people to keep coming back to listen to the next one.
Yeah. That idea of that narrative thread, to what extent do you pre-plan that before you... So you might sit and sort of think, we're going to do a series on this, here's what the thread is. And to what extent does that develop as you interview people and you think, maybe this has changed the way that this story is developing?
Yeah, I think we do quite a lot of the planning beforehand. But yeah, it can. We did this series called Mysteries of Physics, and I think definitely a lot of the planning had to happen beforehand in that one, because you really had to understand, well, we've got to explain to them this quite complicated physics concept in episode 1. Otherwise, they're not going to understand it when you get to episode 3. So I think that is just a huge jigsaw puzzle of a problem. We did a series called Scam Factories last year, which... That was much more of a kind of, I guess, a slightly more classic narrative audio storytelling series. And yeah, really we changed the way that was structured as we were putting together. Different people were originally meant to be in different episodes, and then in the end, it came out as it was. But yeah, we did change that one a lot, and the interviews for that really helped. We built as we went and did them.
I listened to that one while painting the fence last summer, and it's just really stuck with me. Like listening to this episode while just having my very middle class fence painting.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing, isn't it? With podcasts, you remember where you were when you were listening to them. Yeah.
Do you still do the weekly podcast?
I do. Yeah. So that's my main thing that I do every week, and that's changed quite a bit since we started it. So that started in 2021 in the pandemic. And originally it was myself and a colleague in the US, one of our US science editors called Dan Marino. Yeah, I think we were really, really ambitious at the beginning. We thought we'd be able to do so much in each week. And we did. We did a lot. We spoke to 3 academics a week, sometimes 4, and put it together in a narrative episode each week.
But that's a full-time job.
Yeah. So by that point, that was the time when I went full-time doing audio. So it was in 2021, that's when I started doing full-time, as well as the series. And then bit by bit, that podcast has changed format, and we've learned, it's best to stick to one story. We used to have these second stories, we'd call them, at the end. They were kind of 10 minutes at the end of each episode. And they were great. And they were very research driven. So they were almost like a discovery of something. But it's quite difficult if you're not really a magazine show. If you tack on a magazine element to the end, people don't really understand what that is. And so we were getting big drop-offs, after the first story, in the way people were listening. So we said, you know what, let's leave that. And if we think that idea is worth exploring, we'll do an episode about it specifically,
Yeah. So I guess when people are browsing and looking for something to listen to, they want to listen to that thing that is in the subject line, not necessarily a broader topics.
Yeah. And then last year we changed the format a little bit more significantly. So now it's a bit closer to the news agenda now than it used to be. So each episode now is really trying to answer the question, how did we get here? But we're really doing that through an academic lens. So we want an academic to help us explain an element of a history, or an element of a scientific breakthrough about why we've got to the moment that we're in right now.
Weird technical question, but one of the things people find challenging about podcast series is getting listeners to find them. Have you got like a feed with the weekly that, do you intersperse the series into that, or have you got separate feeds for the series?
Yeah, so we have a weekly feed, and we do put some of the series through the weekly feed. So we, my colleagues in the Australian Conversation led on a series called The Making of an Autocrat earlier this year, and they've actually since recently done a new series called The Making of One Nation, which is about the kind of populist right party One Nation in Australia, and they've put episodes of that through our feed, and then we drive people to a separate feed. We've also got the Anthill. We've turned into another feed called the Conversation Documentaries. So we liked the Anthill name, but we didn't think it put our brand front and center. So we changed it to the Conversation Documentaries, and that's where we will put other series. And, we change the name of that feed as we do the series.
You say about your Australian colleagues doing some shows and you're doing some things with people in the US. Do you find that the Australia and the US sort of come to you and that you're the driver of the Conversations podcast, or do the different geographies kind of very much do their own thing?
I think I'm the person who understands some of the technical elements of the way podcasts work at the Conversation a bit, because I've been doing it longer than most people. So people do come to me for advice on things like that, but it's not like I'm in charge of all of the different editions, podcast endeavors. So the way the Conversation works, it's a kind of a network model. So each edition is its own charity in its own place. So we have 9 editions around the world. And so they individually do podcasts. Like our Brazilian colleagues just did a podcast kind of tied to the COP that was in Brazil. That was their first ever podcast. So I helped them a bit as they did that. People bring me into the loop, but it's not.
I was going to say, do they at least coordinate to make sure you're not both doing a series on scam factories?
Yeah, I think we at the UK Conversation have really led the way in kind of putting podcasts really as something that we do, and people value it, and we've done a lot more series in recent years than other editions. Our Australian colleagues are doing a lot more now. One of my colleagues there, Ashlyn McGee, is really leading podcasts there. They're doing a lot more video as well. So different bits of the Conversation do things at slightly different paces and at different times.
When I was looking at some of the documentaries that you've done, you've covered like a really vast range of topics. It can be everything from, you've talked about the scam factories. I think there's a health misinformation series I saw. And then you've just done one on Jane Austen. Yeah. So when you're looking to commission or create a series, what do you look for to make it kind of uniquely conversation-y?
I mean, the Conversation is quite a unique model in itself. It's this marriage between journalism and academia. It's at the center of our model. So for us, it has to be driven by academic research, really. We did scam factories. The way that series came about is that we saw news about these scam factories. I actually saw a BBC article about it. And then one of my colleagues went away and just found this amazing group of researchers who were doing this, writing a book about it. And we thought, okay, well, we think this is enough to do a series on, because they were really willing to talk to us, because they were writing their book. They had all this content. Other series come about because we think that there might be an anniversary or an event or something that we want to cover, or we want to have a series to market, and we think, how can we do that? So the Jane Austen came about because it was the Jane Austen 250th anniversary last year, and we had a lot of content that we were doing already, and our arts desk just came with this really great pitch and said, we think we want to make our first arts series. Can we try? And it was so much fun to put it together, and it was so different to anything we'd done before. And yeah, we were pleased with how it's done.
I'm going to bring in video podcasts. How do you approach video podcasts? Is that something you do differently across the brands?
So far, we've done one video podcast, which is the health misinformation one that you mentioned. It's called Strange Health. And we very much conceived of that as a video podcast. So when we started it, we knew it was going to be video. We don't really want to add video on for the sake of it. We want to conceive of one, I think, that is a video podcast, because even our weekly show, we could probably make bits of it into a video podcast, but it would be quite a different beast, I think. So yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? The industry is trying to figure this out. How do you do it? We liked the idea of doing it for Strange Health because we have 2 great hosts. We have one of my colleagues, one of the health editors here, Katie Edwards, and then an academic who's also a GP, Dan Baumgarten. We knew that they would be good on screen, and so we did it like that. But it's also it's also a podcast, and you can also listen to it in audio. It was a learning experience for us, like technically as well. We don't have a studio, and they were in different parts of the country. I think that's one of the challenges that we have, particularly when we interview academics all over the world. We can't necessarily bring them to studios. They're not always in the same place, and we don't have budget to bring them to studios or do tape syncs or get someone to go and film them. So we do have to really think about slightly lo-fi video solutions as we go down that route.
Yeah, and I guess like it's fairly easy to get a decent microphone, but to get a decent camera setup is a bit more challenging.
And then academics, I think some of them are really willing to be on video, and obviously their press teams understand that video is becoming a really important medium to communicate ideas through, but they might not be that ready. And I think academics' offices are actually always quite fascinating. I mean, we did an interview for the Strange Health episode, and the guy had this amazing kind of stroboscopic light behind him that we were talking about in the episode, but it was right there. And we were like, okay, that's pretty cool. That works in video.
I know you've only done the one that way around, but do you think that there's this debate that I've seen online that if you focus too much on video, you basically just end up with like a crap audio product? Do you see that kind of coming through in maybe some other people's work?
Yes, I have to say I don't. I listen mainly. I don't watch.
Same. I feel like an elder millennial in that sense. But
I mean, you're right, but that's my age bracket too. I understand why people do watch them. Like, it clearly dictates a format. If you're only doing one edit, it dictates a format. Whether you have money to do a second edit and make it audio only, and obviously I think with Apple's move to incorporating video, and you can do that. You can obviously put a different video to audio feed through your hosting platform. But that isn't just as an extra expense, isn't it? And if you're doing quite a regular show, I think you really have to make a decision about whether you want to do that. I don't think I've necessarily noticed a decline in quality. I would say that it's driven a particular format, hasn't it? Of conversational shows that was already there, but it's just accelerated it. Well, I still love narrative, like documentary audio. So
I don't think the way that a lot of the conversations documentaries work, I can't see that translating particularly. I don't know how you do that without doing a full-on video documentary, which is like a completely different proposition.
No, exactly. And I actually think that the way what we want to do, the conversation, we have this goal of democratizing knowledge. It's fairly lofty, but I think it's a good one. We want to get academic research that's locked away and people don't understand the nuances of out to the general public, and actually doing that in a documentary style where you have a narrator or a journalist who's interviewing an academic is one of the best ways of doing that, because it's quite hard to just do that in a one-to-one conversation. You have to go and fact check things, you have to go and put perspective on things people have said, or explain them in analogies that sometimes the academics themselves don't do on the spot. So I do think we will continue to make that kind of show in the future.
You said before the conversation is not for profit, it's a charity. So when it comes to sort of your success metrics, what do you look for in terms of whether a podcast has been a success or not, and maybe which ones to carry on and which ones to not?
So we look at downloads, because it's kind of, I guess, one of the metrics that we have. The way we work at the conversation itself is that we have quite a big metric kind of machine behind our written articles, and that gets fed through to universities. So we look at how many people read our stories through republication as well. So we can track when a story on the conversation, which is all published under Creative Commons license, when it's republished elsewhere, and then we feed that back to universities. We can't do that with podcasts. It's quite difficult. Obviously it's a much less transparent kind of set of data. So I guess for us, downloads, mentions, talking about us, the brand, any partnerships that we have, the fact that, a funder might want to fund a series in the future. That's how we measure it. We also, every series we do, we build content around. So that's part of it. And I guess ultimately our business model means that providing value to our university members is a really big part of the way we operate. So our universities want their academics to be talking, to be quoted, to be seen as the expert in their field. So if that comes through from a podcast, then that's a success for us.
Thanks so much to Gemma for joining us on the podcast. If you want the key learnings from this in writing, just head to voices.media or make sure you're signed up to our newsletter to get it straight to your inbox every Tuesday.
Instead of me telling you who our next guest is going to be, I'm going to tell you about my epic report, the zero-click content shift, which we did in association with Woodwing. Thank you very much, Woodwing, for your support and for your research. It was a lot of fun. I spoke to some great people, and I think there's some really good learnings in there, which are not technical SEO learnings. They're about being an honest-to-God publisher that cares about your audience. You can get it for free. Download at voices.media/zero-click.
Or you can actually listen to some of the interviews if you scroll. I think it's two back in this feed, isn't it? There's a special zero-click episode that accompanies the report. You forgot you did it.
I forgot I made a podcast. What the hell? That must have been a good holiday.
You really needed that holiday.
I really did.
Well, I think I'm going to need a holiday after July. So our Publisher Summit and Awards are coming up July the 8th. Tickets and speakers are all live over at publishersummits.com. We're just putting the finishing touches, but there are some cracking speakers. And if podcasts are your bag, I assume if you've listened this far, they are. There is plenty on the agenda. There's a video podcast panel, including The Observer, Reach and Goal Hanger. There's a dedicated masterclass with the wonderful Chris Stone on which podcast metrics matter most at different stages of your funnel.
Until then, you can keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn, and more importantly maybe, subscribing to the publisher newsletter over on voices.media.
Goodbye.
Bye. We definitely need a sign off. Maybe our sign off is we definitely need a sign off.
Meta.
That is meta. Oof. Bye.